Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel.
Hi guys, so happy to have you here with us again today.
Okay, so today's video is a little different and honestly a bit more personal than usual,
It is. I've actually been putting off telling this story for a while, mostly because it still feels a little vulnerable to talk about.
which is exactly why I think it's worth sharing. Welcome back everyone, I'm David.
And I'm Emma, and today I want to talk about one specific mindset shift that genuinely changed everything for me with language learning. Not English exactly, but the second language I learned as an adult, which honestly gives me a lot of empathy for the struggles our viewers describe.
Right, people sometimes forget that Emma's been on the other side of this exact struggle too, learning a language as an adult, not just teaching one.
Completely. And for a long time, I was stuck in a really specific, really damaging pattern that I didn't even fully recognize until it had already cost me years of slower progress than necessary.
Before we get into the pattern itself, can you set the scene a little? Why were you learning that language in the first place? What was the actual motivation?
I'd moved to a new country for a relationship and genuinely wanted to be able to connect with my partner's family, join real conversations at dinner, not just smile and nod along while everyone spoke around me.
That's such a strong, emotionally meaningful motivation. Honestly, stronger than a lot of the more abstract reasons people often start learning a language for.
It really was strong. And that's actually part of what makes the story a bit painful in hindsight, because I had every reason to want to speak quickly, real relationships depending on it, and I still let fear override that motivation for 2 entire years.
Take me back to the beginning of that. What did your actual speaking ability look like day to day?
So, for the first couple of years, I was what I'd now call a silent perfectionist. I studied constantly grammar books, vocabulary apps, grammar exercises, genuinely a lot of effort, but I almost never spoke out loud to anyone in real conversation.
Why not if you were putting in that much study time?
Because in my head, there was this belief that speaking before you're ready would somehow damage your progress permanently. Like you'd accidentally teach yourself bad habits that would stick forever if you spoke imperfectly too early.
That's such a common belief, actually. We hear some version of that constantly in our comments.
It felt completely logical to me at the time. I thought, if I just study enough grammar, enough vocabulary, eventually I'll reach some invisible threshold of readiness, and then I'll start speaking, confidently, correctly from that point onward.
And how long did you actually wait using that logic?
Almost 2 full years, 2 years of daily study, genuinely serious effort, and almost zero actual spoken conversation practice because I was always waiting for that feeling of readiness that, looking back now, was never actually going to arrive on its own.
What did your actual speaking ability look like after those 2 years of study without much speaking practice?
This is the part that's honestly a little embarrassing to admit. My grammar knowledge was genuinely advanced at that point, probably better than a lot of people who'd been speaking fluently for years. But the first time I tried to have a real, unscripted conversation, I froze up almost completely.
What did that freezing up actually feel like?
My mind would go completely blank, even though I technically knew the words and grammar needed. There's this specific kind of panic where you know the information exists somewhere in your brain, but you genuinely cannot access it in real time under real conversational pressure.
That sounds incredibly discouraging, especially after 2 years of serious, consistent effort.
It was devastating, honestly. I remember specifically thinking, I've clearly wasted 2 years because none of this knowledge is actually usable. That thought alone nearly made me quit entirely.
So, what actually happened next? Because obviously you didn't quit.
I came incredibly close, but around that same time, I had a conversation with a friend who was also learning language, a completely different one, and she said something that genuinely reframed everything for me.
What does she say?
She said, "You're treating speaking like the final exam after studying, when really speaking badly is actually part of the studying itself." That one sentence completely broke apart the entire mental model I'd been operating under for 2 years.
Can you unpack that a bit more? Because I think that's genuinely the core of the mindset shift.
Sure, My old model was linear: study first, accumulate knowledge, reach some threshold of readiness, then begin speaking, ideally correctly from that point onward. Speaking was the reward or the test at the end of a long preparation phase.
And the new model?
The new model was circular, or maybe more like a feedback loop. Speak imperfectly, immediately, notice specifically where you struggled in that real conversation, then study exactly that specific gap, then speak again, using what you just reinforced, and repeat that loop continuously.
So speaking moved from being the final destination to being a continuous input into the learning process itself.
Exactly. And once I made that shift mentally, everything about my actual practice changed. I stopped avoiding conversation practice because I no longer believed speaking imperfectly would somehow damage my progress.
What was the very first thing you actually did differently, practically, after that mindset shift happened?
I found a language exchange partner within about a week, which felt terrifying at the time. And I had, without exaggeration, one of the most awkward, halting conversations of my entire life.
What made it so difficult specifically?
I froze constantly, mixed up basic tenses I actually knew perfectly well on paper, and there were multiple long, uncomfortable silences where I just couldn't find the words at all, even simple ones.
How did you feel afterwards, emotionally, right after that first conversation?
Honestly, simultaneously humiliated and strangely energized. Humiliated because it felt like proof of everything I'd feared about speaking too early, but energized because for the first time in 2 years, I had real, specific, concrete information about exactly what I needed to work on.
Which is such an interesting contrast to the 2 years of pure study beforehand.
Completely different kind of information. 2 years of grammar study told me abstract rules. One uncomfortable, imperfect conversation told me exactly, specifically, precisely where my real gaps actually were under real conversational pressure.
So, what did you actually do with that specific information from the first conversation?
I made a small, targeted list that same evening, the specific tenses I froze on, the specific vocabulary gaps that came up. And I spent my next study session directly addressing those exact identified gaps instead of following some generic, unrelated study plan.
And then you had another conversation.
3 days later, yes, and it was still difficult, still uncomfortable in places, but noticeably, measurably less difficult than the first one, specifically around the exact gaps I'd just addressed.
Such a tight, fast feedback loop compared to what you were doing for the previous 2 years.
Genuinely night and day. Within about 6 weeks of consistently repeating that speak, identify, study, speak again loop, I made more noticeable, usable progress than I had during the entire previous 2 years of pure study.
That's a genuinely striking comparison. 2 years versus 6 weeks.
It's honestly a little painful to say out loud because those 2 years weren't wasted exactly. The grammar knowledge was real and useful, but it was sitting there completely inert, unusable, until I actually started forcing myself to access it under real conversational pressure.
Did anyone around you notice the change during those 6 weeks? Family, friends, the language exchange partner herself?
My language exchange partner definitely did. Around week 4 or 5, she actually said something like, "You're responding so much faster now. It's a completely different conversation than a month ago." And hearing that from someone else, not just noticing it myself, made it feel real in a way that internal progress alone hadn't quite managed to.
That's such a meaningful moment, having external confirmation of something you'd been quietly working toward.
It really was, and it also made me a little emotional, honestly, because I remember specifically thinking about all those earlier months where I'd avoided exactly this kind of feedback, purely out of fear, when it turned out to be the single most useful thing I could have been doing the entire time.
Did that realization change how you felt about the 2 years beforehand? Any regret, or did you make peace with it?
Both, honestly, at different points. There were definitely moments of real frustration, thinking about how much faster I could have progressed if I'd made this shift earlier. But over time, I've made genuine peace with it, partly because that grammar foundation genuinely did matter. It just needed the speaking practice to actually activate it.
Which is a nuance worth pointing out clearly, because I don't want anyone watching this to think grammar study itself was the problem.
No, not at all, and that's such an important clarification. The problem wasn't studying grammar. The problem was treating study and speaking as two separate sequential phases, instead of one continuous intertwined loop happening at the same time.
Right, it's not study instead of speaking versus speak instead of studying. It's weaving both together from the very beginning, even when speaking feels genuinely uncomfortable and imperfect.
Exactly. And once I understood that distinction clearly, it also removed a lot of the guilt I used to feel about the earlier 2 years, because the effort itself was genuine. It was just missing one critical connecting piece.
Let's talk about why this mindset shift specifically works from a learning science perspective, because I think that context helps people trust it beyond just your personal story.
Sure. There's a well-documented gap between what's called receptive knowledge, information you recognize when you see it or hear it, and productive knowledge, information you can actively retrieve and use under real-time pressure.
And pure study, reading, grammar exercises, vocabulary apps mostly builds receptive knowledge without necessarily building productive access to that same knowledge.
Right. Whereas actual speaking practice, specifically the uncomfortable, real-time pressure of live conversation, is really the only thing that directly trains productive retrieval. That ability to pull information out under pressure rather than just recognizing it passively.
Which explains exactly why your grammar knowledge, genuinely advanced on paper, was almost completely inaccessible the first time you actually needed to use it in real time.
Exactly. I'd built an enormous library of receptive knowledge, but almost no trained pathway for productive real-time retrieval because I'd been avoiding exactly the practice that builds that specific pathway.
So, if someone watching this recognizes themselves in your old pattern, waiting for readiness, studying constantly, avoiding real conversation, what would you actually tell them to do, specifically, starting today?
Genuinely find any low-stakes way to speak even briefly this week. A language exchange app, a tutor, even just recording yourself talking out loud about your day for 2 minutes. And treat the discomfort you feel as useful information, not as evidence you're doing something wrong.
And then specifically use that discomfort, the exact places you froze or struggled, as your next study targets, rather than following some generic, unrelated study plan.
Exactly. Close that loop. Speak, notice specifically where it hurt, study exactly that gap, speak again. Repeat that continuously, rather than treating speaking as a distant reward waiting at the end of a long preparation phase.
That's such a powerful reframe. And honestly, I think a lot of our viewers are living in exactly that 2 year version of the story right now without realizing there's a faster path available.
Which is really the whole reason I wanted to share this today. Even though it still feels a little vulnerable admitting how long I personally stayed stuck in that pattern before finally breaking out of it.
I think that vulnerability is honestly what makes this story land so well, because it shows that even people who eventually become fluent, even people who teach this stuff professionally now, went through exactly this same struggle at some point.
Completely. Nobody skips the uncomfortable part. The difference is just how long you let yourself stay stuck avoiding it before finally leaning into it.
Let us know in the comments if you recognize yourself in Emma's old 2 year pattern and if today's the day you're finally going to have that first uncomfortable conversation.
We genuinely want to hear about it, good, bad, or hilariously awkward, because that discomfort really is the exact sign that real progress is starting to happen.
And honestly, if this story resonated with you even a little, the single most helpful thing you can do for us is hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because every follow genuinely helps this channel keep growing.
The more of you who support us by subscribing, liking, and sharing this with someone who's stuck exactly where I was stuck for those 2 years, the more resources we have to keep making honest, personal videos like this one, instead of shallow, recycled tips you've already heard 100 times.
So if you believe in what we're building here, take 2 seconds right now, hit subscribe, tap that bell, and consider sharing this with a friend who needs to hear it. It genuinely makes a difference, and it's the reason we're able to keep this going.
Thank you so much for being here. For real. We'll see you in the next one.